Anyway, thank you all for coming to this meeting of the Place Scrutiny Committee. Apologies for absences. Do we have any? Councillor Ben Burton as one. Do we have any others? No, thank you very much. Do we have any declarations of interest?
I want to do that.
Vice Chair.
Vice Chair, yeah.
Councillor Whitcroft, I understand you volunteered to be Vice Chair in my absence.
It's very kind of you, Chair. Yes, I'm happy to be Vice Chair.
Thank you very much. Now, declarations of interest. Do we have any declarations of interest? No. Okay, no declarations of interest. Minutes of the previous meeting held on the 23rd. Does anyone have any corrections? Nope. Sign on the end? Yep. Okay, fine. Moving on to public participation. We have 4 speakers tonight. The first speaker is Mrs. Karen Woodward. Would you care to approach the microphone? You have 3 minutes.
Thank you for letting me speak this evening. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Karen Woodward. I'm the current manager at York Wheels, the community transport charity within York. The charity was the provider for the Dial and Rad service until December 2023. The reason for me speaking this evening was to make you aware of some of the reasons why Dial and Rad didn't continue and why I feel it's a service that's still required within the city. The main part of the service failing is the outer ring road, unfortunately, as well as large vehicles. The service, when it's providing using large vehicles, 16-seater plus, comes under different legislation, which then incurs tremendous costing. So you now come under an O licence and services, tachographs for your drivers and things like that. Things we weren't really aware of at the time. And you would also need an operation licence for the people operating it. However, having run the service, I do realise how important it is to the citizens and residents of York. I've actually got some figures for you to look at later, which tells you individual wards and how many people in each ward depended upon the service. So, despite this, I do realise that it does need to be updated, the service. So when it originally came into task, it was to stay for 1.5 hours at supermarkets. That was really because they had cafes within the supermarkets and they socialised at the same time as shopping. Unfortunately, there's no supermarkets now, and no cafes in the supermarkets, and we've also got a lot more supermarkets, which across the city, which means coming across the ring road all the time. This makes it impossible for you to utilise a vehicle to its maximum. On paper, it looks good, but when you come to Christmas season or anything going on in the city or snow, you can't get from one end of the city to the other in the appropriate times, and you can't leave the elderly sat waiting for a vehicle because, yet again, the supermarkets have taken away all the seating for them, so they're hanging about or they're stood outside in the cold. So my recommendation, if you want to listen to it, is that the service is done on smaller minibuses with wheelchair accessibilities. At the time of us folding Dial and Ride, we did propose wheelchair accessible vehicles to be utilised, which would mean you get the best from the vehicle because they can take 1 or 2 wheelchairs at the same time as up to 6 to 7 passengers, which then would be better costing for you all. It's a good, effective solution, and it means they can get in and out of the city a lot easier. The 16-seater buses, the turn in the city centre was horrendous for them. I'm happy to speak with any consultants. I've got quite a bit of input, having run the service. The legislation and life has changed since COVID, so that would need looking at. Running the service on a volunteer basis doesn't work either. You would need to employ paid drivers. I currently work with 23 volunteers and they come and go at their own leisure, so to speak, but I'm very grateful for the time that they give me. Okay, that's fine. Yeah.
Thank you very much. We will pass those on to the officers.
Chris, you would.
Begin at your leisure.
Thank you, Chair. Might as well get a free drink while I'm here. So, although you may think you hear far too much of me, it's very, very rare that I actually come to speak at a committee. I can't remember when I last did. I'm here to speak on the Dial and Ride because I am profoundly disappointed at how it's gone absolutely nowhere in such a long period of time. It's now nearly 2 years since Dial and Ride collapsed in the city. We did the scrutiny review, myself, Councillor Fenton and Councillor Jane Burton. And for me, that was a great report. Was certainly very, very interesting to actually do it and research. And we found out so much about the way community transport works. The biggest finding was literally everywhere else in the country seems to make community transport work and York doesn't. And that's an appalling failing. Now, I know that you are the place scrutiny, but for me, it's absolutely a people issue. Dial and Ride being out of existence for 2 years has had real issues for particular people. There'll be people who now cannot go out because that was the deal maker in terms of the shopping. There'll be people for whom the loneliness has just got too much. It's had a real knock. There might be people who've gone into homes because of it. And if you look at the report, it's not the fault of Tom who's obviously written the report, but it could have been done very, very quickly, a very, very long time ago. It sets out some options, and it's really, really disappointing it's taken this long. So of the 4 options, you've basically got 2, which are fundamentally about tendering, and it's about setting out a process for how we tender things, be it for a commercial entity or a non-commercial entity, which are not in any principled way different. And then we've got 2, which are basically about giving money to a non-York supplier, and also one which is potentially giving money to an existing York supplier. And I want to say this about doing this. All we're doing at this stage is we're potentially putting the 20,000 to look at those options in more detail. So this isn't even happening. My gut feel from the report is that the consultant's fee will come out at about £19,999.99. I would very much hope to be proved wrong or we know further on. My suggestion would be we discount at this stage the first 2 options, which are the tendering, because it's about consultants recommending a tender and then going through a tendering process. My suggestion would be we focus on the now, as in literally, let's get some form of community transport up and running as soon as we possibly can. Let's take the £20,000 that would have gone to the consultants effectively. Let's see what other available funds there are. So, for example, we've got a community fund of 100,000 that me, Councillor Eyre and Councillor Pavlovic are looking at allocating. There was a carry forward from there, so that could potentially be something. If we are going to supermarkets, which I think are absolutely part of where community transport should go, some of those supermarkets may provide some sponsorship or some funding. The Mayor may have some funds. So my suggestion would be we don't go with the recommendations, but we go for something much more radical and much more quickly, much quicker than where we are now. To say to the task group,
30 seconds.
Oh, thank you. To say to the task group, get back around the table with the officers, with the likes of Tom and Gary, and what is deliverable. So what can members do and what can officers do? But let's get some of that money out as soon as possible with existing providers, because there must be a reason why everywhere else in the country this works and in York it simply doesn't. So be radical, Chair.
Thank you very much. Councillor Stewart. Our third speaker is Mr. James Leather, who will be speaking on the EV charging strategy. I'll give you a 30-second warning.
I don't know if that's on. Yeah, cool. Thank you and good evening, everyone. I'm here to highlight the urgent need to change course on the Council's proposed EV strategy, specifically the ban on EV gullies that's in place. I believe the current approach will exacerbate inequality as it effectively bans charging an electric vehicle at home for a third of York's residents, which is to say, basically any home without a driveway. Ultimately, I think the problems with the report that's coming up later has 3 elements: the cost of public charging network as it currently stands, the ban on cable gullies for like terrace housing for places that don't have on-street parking, and a lack of understanding on how EV charging works in practice, which is not the same as petrol cars. So starting with public charging, it is true that the number of public chargers has increased, and that's welcomed. However, the cost of these chargers are astronomically higher than at the petrol pump per mile, up to 84% more if you were to compare it to a petrol car. So for example, charging an electric car at Askham Bar's Park and Ride is the equivalent to filling up a Ford Fiesta for £123. In stark contrast to those with off-street parking who have a driveway who currently can fill up their EVs for about £5. This issue only compounds when considering apps like ChargePoint allow residents with an EV charger and a driveway to rent out that charger for profit for themselves at an additional cost to those without off-street parking. Onto cable gullies. Just in case you don't know, a cable gully is a narrow slot in the pavement that lets you run an EV charging cable safely from your home to your car without crossing the path so people don't trip over it. So it's quite easy, so why not allow them? The proposed EV strategy suggests the council's objections to cable gullies boil down to the following 3 reasons. They're against electrical regulations, which I can't find any particular thing that says that's true. BS 7671 amendments specifically permit cable gullies. They just regulate what the minimum standards are. 2, there isn't enough room on the street. Cable gullies are made specifically to fit into a trench in the pavement, so there's plenty of room because they're supposed to be flat to the pavement. And 3, the idea that residents can't always park in front of their own house. And this is true. However, the solution, I believe, is twofold. Allow cable gullies for ideal setups and lower the cost of public charging, which is why I've mentioned them both. York is in a unique position as it owns its own charging network. Therefore, it should explore the possibility of partnership with a domestic energy company, someone like Octopus or another one, to tie home energy bills to public charging, which could halve the cost for EV residents and also increase the uptake in EV. In addition, I would like to ask if the council has carried out an equality impact assessment on the EV strategy. As a resident of South Bank, my nearest overnight public charger is Nunnery Lane car park, a 20-minute walk away, which, if I want to access during the EV charging hours, in accordance with the Minster parking permit, my walk home would be in the dark for most months of the year. This is a major personal safety issue, but also adversely impacts older residents, people with limited mobility, and those with caring responsibilities. Ultimately, whether it's now or in the future, I believe that we will have to re-examine this anyway, but those are my reasons for this talk this evening.
Thank you very much. The committee will take your comment into account. And our 4th and final speaker is Mrs. Flick Williams, who is joining us remotely. Are you with us, Flick?
Good evening.
Do you want 30 seconds or not?
No, thank you.
Please continue.
It is shameful that a city of this size has no door-to-door community transport that is wheelchair accessible. What is even more unforgivable is the complete lack of urgency to fix this problem. This all happened under this administration's watch, and I detect a distinct lack of interest in anything to do with transport as it affects disabled people. Another example of procrastination by people unaffected by their own inaction. The report before you, with a date for completion of this study of XXXX, hardly inspires confidence of any newfound urgency. Pet projects like sustainable travel corridors are prioritised, whilst essential work on this just gets continuously kicked further down the road. And why, in fact, is this a report about commissioning yet another report? Just more time wasting, whilst disabled people get left behind, both literally and metaphorically. In the 2 years since Dial-A-Ride ceased to operate, the well-meaning virtue signalling strategies of this council pile ever higher: tackling poverty, ending social exclusion, age-friendly York, reducing health inequalities, the social model implementation plan, and on and on and on. This total failure to act flies in the face of all of them. And to make things even worse, dither and delay has now cost us dearly, in that we have missed out on funding from the Combined Authority to decarbonise transport. 11 North Yorkshire community transport groups have benefited from this funding. Councillor Fenton's task group report is comprehensive and illuminating. As someone who was part of the steer consultation on the Foot Street shuttle bus from the outset, I also have concerns about the level of knowledge about disabled people's travel amongst transport consultants. It's a familiar pattern that I raise issues which are responded to with, "We didn't think of that." How much money got thrown at that project with it all coming to nothing? 40,000 was it? and now another 20 grand for this. If the mission is enriching transport consultants, then I award you top marks. The absence of any political will to solve this problem suggests to me a similar outcome to the shuttle bus project. So the purpose of this inquiry should be identifying delivery models and organisations potentially willing to provide such a service. I implore you not to waste time trying to establish demand. We know it is there. There was no shortage of demand for the previous service up until the buses continuously broke down and became unreliable. In the 2 years that have elapsed, the people needing this service will have changed. Many will have died or gone into care homes, whilst others who never previously used the service will have seen a decline in their mobility and independence, and they are harder to find. Our city has an ageing demographic, and the incidence of impairment rises with age. This is indisputable fact. Please, please, just get on with it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Williams. We will take your comments into account at the respected item. Thank you. And that ends public participation, which means we move straight into the community transport study proposal. Do we have any officers or executive members who would like to join us for this?
Good evening, councillors. Tom Horner, I'm the Head of Transport Policy and Travel Behaviour at the Council. So it's a very quick covering report, as you've seen. I'm just presenting the proposed way forward with regard to the 20k that's been identified to do a study to identify a preferred operating model and to be used to unlock funding to get us a proper dial and ride service for the city. So that's the proposals in the Annex A, and effectively I welcome comments. In response to a couple of the public speakers there, I can fully see where Councillor Stewart's coming from in terms of the radical approach and getting on with it. The reason why I think the study is important is to help us unlock a proper amount of funding over a period of time to get this done for the best benefit of the residents. If we jump in too quick, I'm a bit worried we won't have the data, we won't have the model and the information for us to be able to build a business case to unlock funding from the combined authority for this. So that's why we want to do the study and get everything in place with a proper document that consults with the right people, including the users, which is really important, as Flick mentions. And then we can go and say, right, here's what York needs to deliver a proper dial and ride service for the city. Here's how much money we need and how much resource, and then we can go and get it done right. So that's the proposed way forward, and I do apologise from an officer perspective of this taking so long to get through, but I welcome any comments from the panel in terms of how we can shape that brief. The reason, in response to Flick, I know it looks bad having the sort of XX deadline, but part of that depends on our procurement time frame. So what I'd be looking for is to have this out to under contract ideally by the sort of back end of January, and we have the study on our desk by end of March, and then that can feed into the funding conversation.
Elias, do you have anything you wish to add at this point?
Nothing to add right now. I'm just here to listen.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any? Oh, yes. So, Callum, I think you may have been first.
Thanks, Chair. I might have lots of questions, but let's see how the discussion pans out. Welcome the apology from the officer on the sort of lack of urgency or whatever, however we want to word it. But could the committee hear specifically what work on this has taken place since the task group report was presented with its recommendations roundly supported by the previous scrutiny committee, which is nearly a year and a half ago? What has happened in that time? Because I thought this report, and perhaps naively, I thought this report would be telling us what kind of service would come and when that might begin. But it looks like we've got a report that says after a year and a half, we're now going to look into it. So can you tackle that and tell us what has happened tangibly on this piece of work since the task and finish recommendations were supported a year and a half ago?
So the work has been, we've scoped out the work and the study that we need to undertake in that time. That's where it's gone. So what you see in front of you is us ready to go out to get a consultant on board to give us the work that we need to get a proper business case identified and unlock the funding.
Right. I mean, that does not sound like a lot of work at all, but I guess, well, it speaks for itself. I'll let other members come in. I'll ask another question or two shortly.
Do we have any supplementals on that question, or shall I move on to Councillor Whitcroft? No, Councillor Whitcroft.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I do echo the sentiment of what Councillor Taylor said. We were both on that committee when that came through, and hearing it sort of that it might come through at the end of March. You know, the result of this, that feels like nearly 6 months. I appreciate the year's gone on with us, but it's still another 4 months on top of the year and a half. By the time we've got it through scrutiny and got it through a decision session and set it all up, we'll probably be looking at 2 years since it was approved by the Transport Committee. I'd just like to try and understand. There's the suggestion that's come through from Councillor Stewart, which I appreciate, around getting the money that we've earmarked for consultation and instead trying to get some sort of service started up there. So rather than perhaps bringing a consultant report to the combined authority or any alternate funding sources, we could potentially bring some sort of working model forward based on the old one. I'm assuming we've still got that process in place. Is there any scope for us just cracking on with it rather than going through further sort of paperwork approaches that is going to take a long time and frustrate, you know, the needs of the people that we're here to try and serve?
I'm firmly of the belief that we need to do some work to present a case for investment so that we can secure vehicles and resource to be able to deliver this properly. I don't think 20k will get you a great lot of service straight off the bat, to be honest. It's going to need investment in the right type of vehicle that has the right level of manoeuvrability to be able to run the service. The part of the reason why the previous service fell down was because of the vehicles itself. We need to get this right, and 20k, I think, if we do get this right and we unlock a lot of money out of it, it will look like good value. But we'll need to do that bit of work. If we lose that, then we still have to find money from somewhere to pull a business case together to start to establish what vehicles we want, what operating model we want. And being honest, I mean, we're running public transport on the skeleton team here at CYC, part of the transition to the combined authority, having public transport powers. We haven't got the resource to be able to sit down and have those proper conversations and understand everything internally. So we need to use that 20k to go out. We wouldn't do that lightly. If we could do it in-house, we would be absolutely doing that in-house.
Certainly.
Just in terms, you said because we haven't got this consultation report, we can't sit down properly with the combined authority. Have there been any preliminary discussions with the combined authority on this? And crucially, is it sort of, I'd like to ask, in your professional opinion, what the chances are of us getting a positive result out of this? Are we going to unlock the necessary funding? Is that as certain as it can be? And is it worth a further 4-month delay?
The combined authority funding for public transport and how they choose to sort of apportion that will very much depend on their final grant settlement. So we don't know what that is yet. There's a lot of changes potentially happening around transport funding and what the combined authority gets. We liaise with their public transport officer, lead officer regularly. We have weekly meetings. It's very much on their radar for something that we'll be putting across to them for a funding ask. But I genuinely, until we know what sort of funding parcel they're going to get and how they wish to apportion that, it's up in the air in terms of how much is on the table. There's an awful lot to consider in terms of other revenue funded streams and how they weigh that up and the importance of dial and ride against those. And I'm sure dial and ride will stack up very well in that respect, because the combined authority and ourselves under delegated powers have a duty to support socially necessary bus services. So there's a lot in its favour. But until we understand the funding parcels and we know how much we're dealing with, it's quite hard to say. Because I can't, until I've got that piece of paper and that study that says, right, a proper down ride service to secure it for 4 or 5 years is going to cost this much per year plus this much capital to get set up potentially. I can't go to the combined authority and say it's going to cost this much, and they don't know how much money they've got to be able to allocate. So we'll be working with them, and I'm more than happy to say that it's one of our sort of key priorities to be considered. but it's going to be the coming months that identify what they want to spend the money on and how much money they actually have.
I believe we have a supplemental from Councillor Taylor.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. And I hear what you're saying on sort of potential funding bid to the combined authority. I guess, I mean, I get increasingly nervous when I hear people say that in this council, because it seems like there's everyone's bidding to the combined authority for something, and there's going to be a hell of a lot more no's than yeses to the various bids that get put. So trying to be a bit constructive about it. I don't know if you remember, but I think we had a meeting about buses relating to Holgate Ward ages ago online. And for some reason we got onto this, and I sort of asked the question, would there be any mileage in seeing if this sort of service can be at least partially supported by adult social care funding? Because I think there's a very easy case to make that this comes under that remit. I mean, it wasn't part of the meeting. It was a sort of side bit to that meeting. So I don't expect you to have looked at that in the meantime. But if you have, it'd be good to hear about what the response to that has been. But if you haven't, can that be something that we look at? Because then we're less reliant on one of the million bids that are going to the combined authority coming off, because we can put some ASC money in.
I think that absolutely needs to be part of the process. We need to look at what council contributions we could potentially put forward, but we need that number of what we think it's going to cost per annum and any startup funding that it's going to need. But absolutely, yeah, we'll factor that in. The reason why we're sort of going combined authority on this is because they're specific public transport powers, and they get that grant for that.
Thank you. We have Councillor Fenton next.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the reports. I won't repeat the points that have been made by others in terms of disappointment at the time taken to get this report. I think it's been clear to many of us for quite some time that a Darling Ride replacement is not a priority. I think, and that's obvious. I'm more concerned about where we go from here, and if this study is to happen, to make sure it actually moves us forward. And I'm thinking back to the discussion we had in June 2024 when we approved the Task and Finish Group's report. We spoke then about this being, in terms of commissioning a replacement, as much a public health and adult social care matter as it is a functional transport matter, because of the purpose that the service serves. It's if we commission a group of transport consultants, and no disrespect to transport consultants, I think we'll have a very technical and probably very interesting report, but it will completely miss the more human aspects of the service that it provides. From looking at the scope, I don't get a sense that it's going to be, and I take on board the point, it's only £20,000. But the scope of it seems quite narrow in terms of will it look at the potential for a Darling Ride service to serve a customer group beyond older people and disabled people? Because again, I'm sure the consultants will read the Task and Finish Group report. We looked at other models where the service provides a public transport options for people often in remote communities who are not older or disabled, and that helped with the financial viability of the service. So I'm worried that will be potentially missed out. The study is going to look at what exists elsewhere, but again, referring back to what we did in the Task and Finish Group, will they look at what facilities already exist in the city? We spoke to Age UK about they have a minibus fleet. I think it's probably not as big as it was. And that might be a non-starter in terms of wheelchair accessibility. But what exists in the city? What community and voluntary groups are currently running services to get customers to venues that potentially could form at least a kind of a bridging service But again, we did all this almost 18 months ago. So I'm looking at the scope of the study. I think there's a risk it's very narrow and we may miss some things. I'd also add in there, maybe it's already been discounted, in-house provision. Why aren't we at least considering it? It may be ruled out in terms of, you know, there isn't the resource or the personnel, but I think in-house provision has to be something that is at least considered. Yeah, so that's all I've got to say on that.
Do you want to sort of sum up, give him a question maybe?
I will leave my remarks for officers to consider.
That's fine.
The speech I wrote, I then tore up because I thought it wouldn't be very constructive. So I've done my best.
Yeah, I don't need a question. We're all right. So I'm more than happy to factor those in. I think it makes complete sense to look at that in-house provision option as I suspect it'll work out quite expensive, but we'll have a look at it, and absolutely happy to broaden that scope to ensure that we look at different customer markets and the like, and existing groups in the city. So I'll update the scope and brief accordingly.
Thank you, Chair. This report speaks of, quote, a brief update to present a proposed scope of works to investigate opportunities to restart a community transport service that will on the XX of XX be followed by a draft specification to form the basis of an exercise. They're mealy mouthed words that as intended say almost nothing, Chair. With luck, some of those who lost the dial ride service 2 years ago may still be alive to see the start of the procurement exercise. I doubt if many of them dream of once again being able to independently access key destinations around the city that they may otherwise be unable to, which is the point of the whole service. I think a comparison is helpful, if maybe uncomfortable. Compare the treatment of those with mobility problems but no car with the laser focus on blue badge holders. For blue badge holders, even the police's determination to protect the city centre from terrorist threats is just an obstacle to overcome. The Labour administration even promises to consider closing York's successful Christmas market, regardless of the impact on the city economy, to protect the dignity and right of blue badge holders. And quite right, you know, that they want to protect the rights of blue badge holders. Hundreds of thousands are spent opening gates used by just 7 to 12 people a day to gain access to the city centre. But for those with mobility problems but no car, time stopped in December 2023. The administration appears to be running down the clock, and vulnerable people, including York residents in villages, are abandoned at home because they're not a priority. And sadly, I have to say, there's no sign of the York Outer MP or the regional mayor trying to get a focus on this and sort it out and give it the kind of urgency that it requires. It's shameful and embarrassing. And I don't know where we go from here because we've got a report that was presented 18 months ago. We know what the issues are. To sum up the inconsistencies, it would seem to be mobility problems in a car, red carpet. Mobility problem, no car, go whistle a happy tune. Many of you will, I hope, see me as someone who is a constructive player, willing to work with everyone to try to get things done. I remain so, but I'm sad to say that the dial and ride fiasco is an embarrassment that shames us all. We've heard from public speakers, 11 other community groups in the region have managed to get funding to get things up and running. We've heard about the need to tackle loneliness from other speakers. We've heard from another public speaker about just needing to get on with it, identify pots of money that we have and just kick-starting change, not waiting and kicking the can down the road. We're talking about people stuck in their own homes, People who previously would have considered it a highlight to be able to sit in a cafe in a supermarket, for goodness sake. And our aspiration is that we can't even do that at the moment, but we'll think about doing it in 12 months or whenever. It's just not good enough. I hope we apply more urgency to this. I remain happy to work with anyone to make it happen. And I'm sure everyone around this table wants to see action. Thank you, Chair. Sorry, there is no question. It's the presentation of a comment, frankly.
Thank you very much, Councillor Vassy. We now have Councillor, as yours, a supplementary, Councillor Taylor, or was it any question?
Yeah.
Go on then.
Supplementary slash, I guess, point of order. I'm with Councillor Vassy on 98% of what you've just said. Granted, it would have been lovely to hear a question, but I don't think there is a proposal to close the Christmas market. And I also think it's not helpful to pitch blue badge holders who rightly had that campaign to reverse the blue badge ban. And I'm glad Labour did what it could to reverse that, albeit there's still a Christmas issue. Pitching them against those disabled residents who do not drive, I just think that's, I don't see the end game there. Both of those groups should be supported to the maximum, and that's why you have Labour councillors sat opposite you, who quite openly and overtly speak up for both those groups, even if it isn't always to everybody's pleasing. I just think that needs to be said. But as I say, I'm with you on 98% of everything else you said. I do have a question, if I can move it forward, but there's probably a queue, Chair, so I can come back in.
Is this supplementary question?
How's the supplementary?
Or it's
There wasn't, yeah, there was no question to be supplementary to, I suppose.
well, I'll put you at the bottom of the list then.
Yeah, thank you. Cheers.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I mean, I would echo, to begin with, without repeating what others have said. This is a disaster, I'd suggest. We're looking at tens of thousands of journeys that have not taken place because this service has dropped, more than dropped under a radar. It's not been evidently a focus, and that's really shocking. I think that I'd like to ask about the bridging position, because if council officers are saying they absolutely have to do a consultant-led report to give evidence that they can unlock outside body funding, then so be it. I won't stand in the way. But I would absolutely agree that an option to be explored would be in-house provision, because I don't accept that it would be more expensive. I think that would have to come out in the report, which would be commissioned, and I would challenge any assertion that said it would be, because that's not my experience. So to come back to the bridging position, as well as pushing for in-house provision, Chair, would be to say, what can we do now? The Task and Finish group put the work in. There are community transport providers in North Yorkshire and in York. Presumably there were costs recovered from the situation which led to the contract failing 2 years ago, and the service failing because of the maintenance company that went into administration, with an auction taking place of the vehicles. There's costs recovered there. So is that still accessible to run a bridging service until we get a 12-month bridging service or a 6-month bridging service? Has anything been assessed as an option so that people can just get from A to B?
I can take that away and have a look at it and see what funding is left available and work on that.
Thank you. We have a supplemental from Councillor Fenton.
Yeah, speaking of the point about the council sold the problematic vehicles for half of their original value, so that will have generated £100,000. there was talk at the time, Councillor Stewart may remember, about potentially using some of that money to fund the purchase of some wheelchair accessible vehicles, so that at least the which potentially could benefit the York Wheels voluntary car service in terms of expanding the pool of wheelchair accessible vehicles that are available. Tom, do you know what happened to that £100,000?
That's what I need to go and double check exactly before I say anything in this environment. But I'll go away and check on that, and I can issue an email update to members following the meeting.
Yes, it is. And I'm pleased to hear what's just been said, and I'm pleased to hear what was said by councillors across the aisle, and would very much support the bridging service, and would ask if officers are going to look at potentially using 20,000 plus the 100,000, if that's what exists, to very much look at it in the context of using that to get matched funding, to get everything up as quickly as possible, and to bridge this period while they think about other stuff, rather than allowing time to continue to pass. So would officers be happy to look at, assuming there is this £100,000 or whatever there is, and look to getting matched funding as soon as possible to get a system up and running?
Yeah, I'll happily look at that. I'll need to see what's in the round in terms of that funding available. I do think the study needs to be in there to get us the best model for a proper long-term service that everyone can rely on. So that's where I definitely think we need to progress this 20k piece of work. But I will absolutely have a look and see what funding's still available and what options might be achievable with that.
With the ambition of getting something up and running quickly, rather than just looking to the end of next year.
No, yeah, appreciate the consensus appears to be, bridging service.
We now have Councillor Taylor, who's the last person to have indicated. I think we're getting close to the end. Go on.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I've got two questions, if I may. They're not really related, but hopefully they're fairly quick.
Feel free.
My first question is, I take on board what you're saying about how sort of small the transport team is versus all the different projects, asks that come to you. But could you, or the executive member, articulate where this issue sits against other priorities, maybe from this point moving forward? Because my fear is that we've had quite a candid discussion tonight, I think necessarily so, but this will just sort of go back into the blob of all the things that are in the middle. So you've ward issues that get people going on a local basis, and then you've got your really big citywide stuff like the sustainable travel corridor. This needs to be up there with the sustainable travel corridor stuff and all the other big stuff, station frontage project. It needs to be on par with those big citywide projects. And I'd like to hear somebody say it will be, because, and I say that not just because of the issue, which I think speaks for itself, but this has come to scrutiny. There's clearly cross-party consensus on it. There has been for a while. And I think that merits bumping it up the list. I know it's not a list, like basic list, but I'm sure you see where I'm coming from. Could you say that following this discussion, it will be treated as a priority, as in proper priority, because there's many?
Well, I can give you as much reassurance as I can at my level. So I'm head of service, in part acting up at head of transport to work where I can due to staff sickness. So we absolutely recognise the impact on residents of this and some of our most vulnerable residents. No one wants to be sat having to say it's not going to be a priority at all. There are a lot of things going on. I need to do a bit of work with my director of how I can get some extra resource into my team to make sure we can put someone onto this and start looking at it with more hours than we currently have to do. So what I can do to hopefully reassure you and appreciate you haven't got a director sat in front of you here who's going to absolutely say, yes, I'm going to make sure the team put this top of the list. I can go and have that conversation and make sure that I've got the resource to move this on quickly and effectively. I've given you a commitment today that I'll look at this bridging service and I'll find the hours in my team to go and do that and assess what we can do with the existing funding that may be available. We'll get the study commissioned, we'll oversee that, and we'll work with the combined authority colleagues to try and secure funding and ensure that it has the priority that it deserves when we're talking about that public transport funding for next year and beyond. So I can give you that commitment at my level now, and I'll have a conversation with the director and he can make sure as officers we are treating it as high as you're wanting it to.
Thank you. I mean, Councillor Aurelius, as I guess the accountable politician in this area, would you be willing to sort of second that or say something around that? I'm very conscious that there's all sorts going on. I get that, but I do think there's merit being at the top of the mix.
Yeah. This dial and ride scheme, it's an open wound. I want this to move forward as much as you do, as much of all of you do. I'm frustrated that we had the budget funding, back in April, and I'm frustrated we haven't managed to move more quickly. In defence, Tom and his team are massively short of capacity. They're having to deal with transfer of bus powers to the mayor, retendering the park and ride, and managing the day-to-day of a really busy, extensive bus service. And on top of that, we have had a lot of officers either sick or vacancies in the team for extended amount of time. So I'm not trying to make excuses, but there is a reason why it has taken a long time, and it's not because it's not a priority. It's just actually doing the day-to-day stuff is flattening everybody, let alone doing something else in addition. In terms of making this a priority, the challenge and the reason it's really important that we do this study and get and develop a model of how this can work sustainably, not as a kind of throw some cash at it, it works for a year and then it collapses again, but we want a sustainable model. And the reason that's really, really important is that we as a local authority are having to seek cuts all the time in our budget. Finding any growth for anything is just nigh on impossible. So we have to find a model where we can sustainably keep this going. I think it is really important that we treat this alongside public health and adult social care. I absolutely agree that we need to not have these siloed budgets and treat it as a transport issue on its own. So really value the comments that came in around that, and I think that's really important. We have to look at how it's going to be funded and how it can then be maintained as a sustainable service, and funding it via transport on its own is a risky way of doing it because it's then just a bus service like any other bus service, and then it becomes threatened. So I think it's really important that we do the model, but I am also taking away the really strong desire to find something in the interim. I don't know how possible that is going to be because, again, partly the officer capacity to actually set up that's something in the interim. But I think what we really want to do is get on and get this study done as quickly as possible so we've got a model and we can then seek that funding and really get it set up as fast as we can.
Thank you. I mean, I do have my second question, Chair. Sorry. You did let me, so
Of course.
Thank you. I'm grateful for the answer. I mean, I think in response, I say, and I agree with you. I think officers are struggling. The council is struggling. But it's about time this council starts openly admitting that, because if you look at the council from the outside and you look at the press releases and the website, we're doing amazing things. Everything's all hunky-dory. When the reality is people are being crushed and services are failing, or closing, or nowhere near good enough. And the only way the political pressure turns is if people start openly saying that this is the reality. We've only got it tonight that everyone's struggling because we've asked questions in a scrutiny meeting, but in all the council's PR and outward looking stuff, you'd think the council thinks it's doing amazingly, and it's just not the case. We're struggling, which sort of leads to my final question was related to the answer around funding. Have the combined authority been clear about exactly how much information they think you need to have as part of your business case? Because part of this is going to be that at some point you're going to have to accept that there's an element of risk here. We're not going to have all the answers because the types of people that Dial and Ride will support are by definition hard to find, hard to engage with. There will be a big question mark over this, and we have to be willing to make that step at some point. Otherwise, the service will never get off the ground. So do we know what enough information is going to feel like? I'm guessing we do, because these other community transport organisations in North Yorkshire have been able to pull it off. So I'm sure we can.
So we don't know for sure yet because they're still, and sorry, this is a bit jargony, but they're still developing their assurance framework, which is the way that they assess funding bids and develop them, because it was a bit more in its infancy last year. So we've got, for instance, the transport projects this year have got a fairly light touch appraisal table that we have to fill in terms of expected funding costs, risks, strategic case, things like that. So what we'll need to provide as an absolute minimum is a costed plan for them over a period of years of how much funding would require and how everything would be resourced with the risk assessment and a strategic case. Now, we'll write that strategic case in-house. I don't think it takes a great lot of doing because the reasons for needing a Dial and Ride service are so obvious. We can comfortably put that together. But what I do need are the hard numbers and the best operating model for us to all to be able to make a decision on how we want to take it forward long term. And that's what the study will inform, and that information will directly go into securing more money.
Got a couple of questions. For context, just how big is your team?
On the public transport side?
That would be applicable to this area that we're talking about.
The team that runs the council's public transport functions under me is part of my time, because I have transport project client role and road safety and the travel behaviour team on top of it, on top of public transport. So I have one public transport planner. I've got a information officer who produces all the roadside timetables and delivers the integrated York ticket apportionment and works with operators on that. I've got a part-time member of staff who administers the enhanced partnership, and she does a few other things, an absolute star for us. I've got a part-time monitoring clerk who goes out and checks the park and ride sites and things like that, and a member of staff who leads on real-time information and bus shelters. And that's what we do for the entirety of our public transport responsibilities.
So in terms of sort of strategy and policy and new ideas and this kind of stuff, you're talking our person then?
I've got one public transport planner to deal with that side of things, and he deals with diversions and contract management, concessionary fares.
Okay. No. I think it's just helpful for the committee to understand the ask and the resources to actually deliver it. Second thing, I don't know, 15 years ago, the then director of finance came up with the idea that, yes, we should run some sort of bus service, but they'd do kids in the morning, then they'd do adults during the day, then they'd do kids in the evening. And it would fill out a sort of 8-hour block of time. So I wouldn't exclude the sort of send transport that we do, which I am aware is quite expensive, being provided by taxis. So that might be something that when you're looking at your pots of money to fund the service, you could get some from, as you said, public health, adult social services, transport, and possibly also children's. And that's all my questions. So if we have no more, thank you very much for your recommendations. Excellent. Thank you very much for that. What are the recommendations?
Is that rhetorical?
Do we, what are the recommendations that we managed to pick up? We, or shall I briefly
Look
summarise?
through. Yes, if you've got them to note, otherwise I'll have to read through what I've wrote down.
It's fine. One, if you can look into an interim solution that can get something done quicker. Two, looking at the various pots of money. And three, if we can just have a sense of urgency and priority, which, given the size of the team, I think that may be a difficult ask. Do we have any other?
In terms of the comments around the scope that we were asked to review, if you could take on board some of the comments in terms of not potentially inadvertently excluding some options, which may be considered and discarded in terms of in-house provision, but I think we do at least need to think about it, even if it's discounted. But if you could bear in mind some of the comments made on the scope of the study, that'd be helpful.
Yeah, of course. And that covers recommendations. It's now 7:30. Can we push through to the next? 6:30. Can we now push through to the next agenda item? No one needs to take a break? No? Good. Thank you very much.
You've got me again, unfortunately.
Would
you mind if I sit on the side so I can look at the screen?
You can certainly sit on the side.
Thank you very much.
You need to practice this, don't you? You could tell it's a long time since I've learned. Okay, Tom, are we ready when you are?
Perfect. So we've just done this I think this is a new presentation format, so it's more to enable a bit of discussion. So I'll just run through the presentation and take any questions at the end if that's okay. So we're just outlining the proposed approach to the council's new electric vehicle charging infrastructure strategy. And Andrew's here with me for a bit of technical expertise to help give you the answers to the tricky questions that you might well have. So a very brief history. So the first public charging infrastructure in York started to go in 2013. So we're one of the early adopters across the UK. We've got quite a lot of real world experience now in delivering EV charging infrastructure as a result. The development of the first strategy came through in 2019 and then was adopted in 2020, and that coincided with the rollout of plenty of new infrastructure. So we started the development of the second strategy in 2024 and aiming for approval on the second strategy, which will run from 26 to 2030, aiming for that early next year. So this is an important part of the process in us having a chat with you to understand what your thoughts and feelings are on the preferred approach ahead of any approval at exec. So we've got a number of different partners involved. I won't go through this list, but it just kind of shows that there's a lot of organisations, a lot of people involved in bringing forward a quality charging network, particularly the Energy Saving Trust, who are working with us on development of the strategy, and then their advice and understanding of how things are working all across the country is really invaluable. So before we get into the nuts and bolts of it, I'll just cover off a few bits of jargon or terminology. So when we refer to a standard charge point, that's a 7 kilowatt charger, and that's equivalent to a domestic charge point, and typically would take a few hours or overnight to charge a vehicle. A rapid charger is a 50 kilowatt charger, and that effectively gets a a proper top up in around 30 minutes or from 30 minutes. And then the ultra rapid is the types of charging you see at the hyper hubs. That's 170 kilowatts, and you can get a good top up charge in around 10 minutes from one of those. So the ethos that we're bringing with this strategy is just building on the current approach that we have. So we're aiming to progress further, develop on the basis of what we've successfully been delivering to date. We're proposing to retain the no cross pavement parking provision, charging provision, which I'll have a chat through later on. Some of the reasons why, because I appreciate the member of the public's come with a few issues around that. We're taking a 3-tier approach as now, so we're looking for rolling out standard charging near residential areas, rapid distributed across the city, and then the hyper hubs at key locations. So what we're really trying to do here is roll out more charging sites so it's more accessible and easier for people to get to them, continue to sort of build on what we've done and get more hyper hubs in place as well to act for the regional journeys and for local quick top-ups. One of the key principles, what we're trying to do here is enable and not embed, and I'll touch on that a bit later, and basically support our local transport strategy, all the modal shift ambitions, the active travel ambitions in there. We've got to leave the options open for people to travel by sustainable mode first and foremost, and then by EV where they need to make vehicle trips. So we effectively want people to be choosing walking, wheelchair use, wheeling, cycling or public transport, and that helps to manage demand on the network and achieve our healthy place objectives. So that's quite a tricky balancing act with this, because we want to really boost the EV charging provision that we do have, but we still need to keep the focus to be in line with our charging strategy and not to increase the number of vehicles on the network. We still need to keep a lot of focus on that walking, cycling, public transport element. If people have to drive, then we definitely want that to be in a zero emission vehicle. So that's the enabling part. And we've got the hierarchy of transport users, which places walking, cycling, public transport firmly at the top. So we signed up to some challenging targets. So we've got a 20% reduction in car mileage that we signed up to through the local transport strategy. So providing cheap EV charging all over is going to be contrary to that, because we'll just end up with more car use across the city and then we'll get more congestion. So it's like I say, it's quite a tricky situation for us, this, that in enabling significant amounts of EV car use, and if that ever becomes more advantageous than walking, cycling, public transport, we just end up with more cars and more congestion that the roads can't handle. So we have to get this sort of balancing point right in terms of how we provide for it. So we don't want to embed that private car ownership, but we absolutely, like we say, we want to enable it when people do need to run a car. So one of the key principles here is about making sure we're increasing the proportion of car, van, light goods vehicle journeys, not the overall number. So this talks quite clearly, the approach we're sort of taking here talks quite clearly to that local transport strategy principle. So I kind of touched on this in terms of continuing this 3-tier approach, but we're looking at an awful lot of new sites across the city on available council land that we're hoping to be able to introduce charges in more local areas to people, so you won't have to walk as far to get to them. We're undertaking the sort of assessment analysis work of those sites at the moment, but then we'll hopefully make a formal commitment and set a target around how much of the city we want to be accessible within a certain time frame of a standard charge point as part of one of the targets and monitoring element of the strategy. So the key thing on the cross-payment charging, the curbside's valuable space. So we're developing a curbside strategy as part of the movement and place plan, and one of the key things that's coming through in order to enable that walking, cycling, public transport uses, that we need to make sure that we've got the public highway available to us to do that. There's no current available home car charging solution that we'd accept on our highway. So Andrew and the team have done a lot of work with Highways Authority colleagues, and there isn't a product that our Highways Authority colleagues would accept on pavements currently. So there's a couple of different key bits to this, and I've inserted some diagrams into this presentation to hopefully explain it a bit better, and happy to take any questions after. But ultimately, there aren't any gullies that meet electrical regulations at the moment. And 80% of our target terrace properties front directly onto the pavement. Now that gives us rise to some of the electrical regulation issues that I'll chat through shortly. There's two sort of core elements to the physical on-highway element to this. So the charge point currently has to be mounted on the outside of the house, and the cable would then need to be untethered so you can remove it so it's not in use, so you don't have a cable sticking out of the charge point onto the pavement. Even when it's locked in, it still can't smoothly fit to the side of the dwelling. So you end up with something like this. And apologies for the slightly tin pot diagram. I pulled this together in a meeting earlier on when I realised it was rather difficult to explain. So basically, at the moment, you would have to mount to the front of a terraced house that fronted directly onto the pavement. You would have to mount a charge point, and then the cable would sit in there while it was charging, because it doesn't slot in directly horizontally in. Then the second issue is relating to BS 671 regulation 411.3.1.1, and that is that there's an electrocution risk from simultaneous contact, and any charging car has to be 2.5 meters from any other charging car or other electrical device if on separate earthing systems. So what that means in practice is, because each dwelling is a separate earthing system, you could have a situation like this where the brown at the top is the number of houses. So we've got 9 houses on this hypothetical street, and these are the vehicles that each house has. So number 18's got 2 cars in this example. So to keep everything 2.5 meters from each, to keep each vehicle 2.5 meters from each other, on this on a block of 9 houses, best case scenario, if everything works perfectly, you could get 4 dwellings to be equipped with EV charging infrastructure. So immediately there's an issue there with refereeing who's allowed to have that charge point. But the more astute amongst you, and all of you probably spotted the fact that it doesn't always work like that perfectly on a residential street where everyone parks outside their own house. So very quickly you get into a situation like this, where if number 18 is charging their first car, and then they decide to charge a second car, but number 14 is parked outside the house, you've got 2 charging vehicles within 2.5 meters of each other then, and there's a risk of electrocution, and it's against the regulations. And similarly, on the other end, you can see it doesn't take much for people to be moving the vehicles around for this to become significantly problematic. Even if you were to have 2 of the 9 dwellings on this hypothetical street with a charging block, so number 4 and number 14 at either end, it's very, very feasible that 2 cars could end up next to each other. So the challenging thing for us here is that the cable, how long is a EV charging cable and how far up the street can you park? It's basically, it's far, far longer. So there's no equitable way that we can think of, short of giving our highway space to parking bays, which is something that we would absolutely limit the use of the public highway and limit our council's opportunity to bring in walking, cycling infrastructure improvements if we were to set residential parking bays on a terrace street, which would mean equally in practice that you can't get as many cars on it, so some residents will be missing out. We don't think at present there's a way of being able to referee or equitably allocate who has a charging gully. So there's some serious issues with that, and for at the present point in time, until something significant changes, we're proposing no on-street charging infrastructure, apart from potentially supporting dedicated car club bays, which would then have a charge point on a build out. So the delivery model we're proposing is standard and rapid charges in car parks, standard charges on the additional off-street locations that we're looking into, a number more standard charge points at council-owned sites, and then progress with the hyperhub proposals. We've also looking to help and support more from a promotional perspective, private domestic charge point sharing, commercial sites, workplaces, and we'll have a look through the car club contract that I'll hopefully be bringing to scrutiny to consider prior to its issue for procurement, how we can make that go electric and look at bays on street for those. These are the current sort of core charging locations, and then these are the areas of search that we're looking at in particular. So there's a number of areas where we've got quite high concentrations of terrace streets. It's not exclusive to this, but these are the broad areas of search in the first instance that we're looking at for those additional standard charge point locations. And then we're also going to be bringing in the 2 new hype hubs, one in the city centre at Union Terrace, and then we're exploring further sites to the south of the city for another hyper hub. So that's a very quick overview of where we're proposing to go. And Andrew and I are happy to take any questions, comments and thoughts.
Thank you very much. Do we need to turn around the camera or not? No? Who would like to start us off? Councillor Whitcroft.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks for the presentation. Pleased to see that we're expanding on our EV strategy, but I've got a little bit of concern around the on-street parking dynamic there. When I run my drop-in surgeries, I have quite a lot of interest in this area. In my ward of Fishergate, where you've got quite a lot of on-street parking, a lot of terrace houses, people have invested in EV cars because it's the right thing to do. It's not almost as if they decided to buy one instead of cycling or walking. It's because they'd otherwise have a petrol or a diesel car, and we should be encouraging that. I do accept that a traffic jam by another name would be as difficult, and we don't want to just replace every single petrol car with an electric car, because then we'll have the same problems just with less fumes, and that is a benefit, but it's not necessarily the direction we want to go. A few residents have come to me, and I'm happy to sort of extend via email with solutions. When you discussed the idea of having a charging port on the side of a terraced house, from what I can tell, that wasn't necessarily the experience of a lot of residents who charge their cars. A lot of them use their own domestic electricity supply, their own domestic plugs, and put that into the car themselves. I think there is probably scope to be a bit more creative with how they might be able to do that on a street, rather than there just being a port that we all have to install or have to work to install. There's potential use of some sort of an elevated structure, potentially going over the pavement so that it wouldn't inhibit, or potentially some sort of mat that could be used to keep the wire safe, prevent people from tripping over it. I know that there was a lot of concern when people contacted the council about this at first. There was almost a bit of a hostile response from us when it came to, no, you cannot ever park and charge your car on a terraced street. And I'd welcome the opportunity to be a bit more positive here. Is there any scope of having a look at some more creative solutions in the future for on-street terrace car parking to have electric charging? Because I kind of keep having to say no to my residents, and I don't like to do that.
No, and I get that puts you in a tricky. I get it put you in a tricky spot, because a lot of people are trying to do the right thing here, aren't they? And we definitely recognise that. The problem we have, I'm happy to have another look at it in some form if the technology changes, but there's nothing on the market that meets the regulations and that is compliant with both the regulations and with what our Highways Authority accepts. So the charging arms that go across, there's nothing there that we'd be comfortable approving at the moment. So there's just in summary, there's too many challenges at this point in time for us to be able to include it in our strategy. I think if there's developments in technology, if there's changes to electrical regulations, then that might necessitate a change in approach. But at this point in time, as I've sort of chatted through, you'd be in such a tricky spot if you allowed a gully on one street, because then there'd be a number of neighbours would turn around and say, "Oh, why can't we have one?" And if we were to allow that, we'd be effectively going against that electric regulation that I outlined, and there'd be a risk of electrocution there. So it's not something we'd be prepared to authorise as Highway Authority. I mean, maybe what we could do is put some lines together for you why we're sort of taking this approach and why we are where we are. Then you can just send that straight on to residents, and hopefully that might make things a bit easier. I don't know if that's something we could do.
I think Councillor Villiers wants to come in, and then yes, we'll come back to you for supplemental.
Just wanted to add, in terms of thinking what we can do, I think something that we will want to explore as part of the strategy is shared EV charge points that are on street. So certainly one of the locations we're looking at for neighbourhood charge points is on street chargers. So it would be on your street, it just wouldn't be directly connected to your house. So that still means, you know, within Res Park, for example, when there's a community wanting to explore Res Park and we do that first survey, one of the questions we could ask is, would you be interested in having EV charge points installed on street? And then we can make sure they're positioned in the best possible place on that street so that everybody has that shared use and it's on street, but it's just not necessarily right outside your door, but it's still convenient. So I think that's the sort of direction we'd be likely moving in terms of providing convenient charging. But the direct connection to the house and across the pavement is the major challenge.
Supplemental.
Yes. Thank you both for your answers. I was going to supplementary and sort of target then our elected politicians here, because obviously we've got a government that is quite keen on developing an EV strategy. The Secretary of State for Transport is very interested in this area. I know Councillor Stewart's gone now, so he won't mind about me talking about writing letters. But if there do need to be changes to the electoral regulations, I appreciate they're there for a good reason, but this must be the case in councils all over the country. Is there any sort of lobbying we can do or working through the mayor to try and communicate this specific issue to sort of upwards and see about potentially that being included in some of the transport regulation changes, or is that just sort of wishful thinking?
Yeah, sure.
I'm just, if there's electrical safety at play, I think it's probably for the market to develop a product that works. It would be my gut feeling. I don't think lobbying for a change in electrical regs would be the way forward. It's probably for the market to respond and come up with a solution that they're comfortable that we can approve as Highways Authority, for that to be able to be a route that we go down.
Yeah, sure, Kate. No,
So I was just going to say, it's also that tension between our transport strategy and wanting to enable EV. And in this case, one of the really important things is about how we use our street space in an equitable way, and allowing everybody to have a private parking space to do EV charging isn't the most equitable way of using terrace streets, because some people will prefer to have a car club vehicle there outside the house. Some people will prefer to have some covered secure cycle parking, or a tree planted, or a bench, or so many other ways in which public highway can be used. So I think in an urban area, we have to really think about, firstly, the best use, an equitable use of terrace street space, and then also, as we've said in the strategy, that if everybody simply just transitions from the fossil fuel car to an EV car, we still do have the same issues with congestion in the city, which we know are grinding the city to a halt. So we have to enable public transport as well, whilst recognising that we want people to be able to switch to EV. So it's a tightrope to walk, and it's a challenging one. But in terms of lobbying the government, I don't really feel that that's where the challenge is. I feel we need to be looking at shared EV facilities rather than private outside your door, private parking spaces.
I believe you had a supplemental.
Yeah, thank you. So on lobbying the government, I don't really think they need lobbying. They seem to be on the right channel, really. So they did have the electric vehicle pavement channels grant open this autumn, which makes me think that the sort of electrocution risk is surely very, very minimal or manageable. Otherwise, the government wouldn't be providing grants for this sort of thing. Or is that not the case?
we're quite surprised that that grant's been put out, to be honest, or I certainly am.
That's quite a position.
I'm happy to take that position. I am. I wouldn't have sat down and talked you through that. I don't believe there's, as per those diagrams, I don't believe there's an equitable way of saying who can have a charging gully and who can't on a terrace street. I don't think that's there yet, and in line with the regs. I'm surprised that's come out. But
I mean, that is interesting. But on equity, Chair, I would almost want to put back to you that it's already a free-for-all when it comes to parking in unrestricted areas. So nobody currently in an unrestricted area has a right to park outside their home. It's just tough when you get what you get in crowded areas. So I don't see much of a difference in circumstance if you apply the electric vehicle charging opportunity into that mix. And surely having some electric vehicle charging opportunities is better than none.
so
Does that make sense? If you're not in a res park area, someone from Cornwall can drive up to York and park outside your house and have every right to do so.
they can. I mean, what I do, it would absolutely embed a culture of I need to park outside my house and that is my curb space, and that'll be challenging from a community point of view, I suspect.
But it's already there.
It is already there, but it doesn't matter if you have to park at the end of the street, you're frustrated by it, but you have to do it and you walk down. But if you need to charge your car overnight and you can't park outside your house, that's a significant problem then, depending on the length of the charging cable, I suppose. It would be, no, but it would be, in my view, it would be seen as giving people that curb space to park their car and charge their vehicle because that gully would be there. But I know where you're coming from. I just think, and we maybe need to do a bit of work with government prior to adopting the strategy to just get a handle on why they think it's something that can be rolled out.
Councillor Rebellious and then Councillor Vassie has a supplemental.
Oh, just going to say, it's that thing about the gully charge is designed to charge directly outside your house. If you can't park directly outside your house, it does leave the cable trailing down the street, which then starts to become an accessibility issue. And it, I can't remember the second point I was going to make, but then there's the electrical risk, as Tom's diagram showed, that you end up with people charging next to each other within those 2.5 meters. So because you're trailing the cable to the place it wasn't designed to be trailed to. So it is a bit different to the current free-for-all. I totally get the current free-for-all is not a good thing either, but when you add in the need to charge the car, it takes on another element of risk.
Thank you, Councillor Vassie. Supplemental.
Yeah, supplement that. The word equity has been mentioned a few times. So I want to know why it's fair that I, who have off-street parking, can pay 7 pence a kilowatt hour to charge my car, and even less in summer because I've got solar panels. But that gentleman over there has to pay between 40 and 80 pence for a kilowatt hour and walk 2 miles for the privilege of doing it. I think the equity argument is completely bogus, frankly.
But I'm not suggesting it's an equity issue between someone who has a driveway and someone who doesn't. It's the point I was trying to make is how do you referee between the people on that street and say who is allowed to have a charge point and who isn't. So that was the sort of scope of where I'm talking from an equity point of view. There's no reason in my mind where someone at number 4 should be allowed a charge point, but someone at number 6 shouldn't. So just for a bit of clarity.
Thank you. That's the end of supplementals on that one. Councillor Myers.
It's kind of in the same vein. Thank you, Chair. I really appreciate the presentation. That's been helpful. But I would ask about additional work or additional learning, I guess, or what can we as an authority learn from others that have already done shared charge points, like a lot of the London boroughs for many years now, and a similar council to our own in size and demographic, like Oxford, that's got its own trading company developed a cross-gully charging facility that's been lauded recently by government, and it's a £25 million investment grant thrown out from government to local authorities to be part of that. So the electrical argument's thrown me a bit because I've not heard that one before and it wasn't in the papers. So I've seen the presentation and I absolutely agree if there's a safety issue, but where are the safety issues with Oxford scheme as an example that's unlocked £25 million in funding? And then the London Borough's example that have been running shared charge points for many years. Why as a highway authority are we not able to accept? Do we have higher standards, and what reasons are those higher standards compared to our peers? I'll leave it there if you've got answers to that, but I might jump back, Chair, if that's okay.
We welcome it.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so I think on the first part of it of learnings, so we are in a fortunate position that we've been able to follow those trials from the early stages. So the Oxford trial was the first one, which was set up in about 2019. So it's a long-standing trial they've had. So we've been able to learn from local authorities that have taken forward solutions and local authorities that haven't. And we're also fortunate to be on an OZEV working group. So OZEV, the government department that issued the funding for Gully. So we're well placed in terms of information. I think one of the challenges that creates is it is a complex space, and the more time you spend talking to local authorities that have done it, that haven't done it, listening to OZEV's position and talking to the technical bodies, the more and more questions come out. It's one of those topics where you start pulling it a bit of string and then you realise actually there's a lot more to it than you think at face value. So yeah, in terms of learning, we're in kind of a better place than a lot of local authorities in terms of the access to information that we've got. What that does do is give us a lot of different viewpoints, a lot of practical learning, a lot of theoretical stuff, and a lot of standard stuff, which we have to kind of work our way through. In terms of the OZEV position, it's one of the things that we and a number of local authorities have discussed with OZEV over a period of time. Again, we've been represented on the OZEV working group for about 8 or 9 years. So we've got quite a long-standing relationship with OZEV. The concern that we had is that the perception is that OZEV is supporting gully charging by putting forward the funding. And the OZEV position is quite nuanced in that they want to provide funding for local authorities that are happy to take forward solutions to this. So in effect, to trial products. But they've been very clear that OZEV isn't providing any legal expertise or any advice on meeting individual standards. It's up to the local authority level to do that due diligence. And what's kind of come out of that is the conversation we had with OZEV that on face value, it looks like if OZEV puts a sum of money up, that they are endorsing the product, which they're not. It's the responsibility of each individual local authority to satisfy themselves one way or another. And where the kind of difficulty with learning as you go along is, so a number of the local authorities, so we're not speaking on behalf of any other local authority, but I'd say what is the case is because local authorities have been predominantly trialling solutions, they haven't known certain things until they've got further down the line. So the issue with regulatory standards that's come up now wasn't something that was widely discussed amongst local authorities last year. It's something that we flagged up 5 years ago, but it wasn't widely discussed in the local authority community. So that came as new information to some of the areas that are undertaking active trials. And now obviously they're in the position of having to make a decision with that new bit of information. So I think what it illustrates is they look like a very straightforward solution that's readily available as an off-the-shelf product. The reality is that there's still a lot of learning going on, and local authorities are at different places with that learning process. And also there's a wide disparity between the information that local authorities have access to. So some have lots of information, some have very little. So I think that kind of explains where the OZEV bit comes in and why it's a challenging space, because it is, we're all collectively across the country learning things on a weekly and monthly basis.
I think so. If you were just piloting it and bobbing back a little bit to the rubbish diagrams, if you just had one house on that street with a charging point, none of this conflict with the 2.5 meters is relevant, really, is it, at the particular time, because no one else is using charging infrastructure. But if you're looking at it as part of a strategic standpoint and how you start to roll it out, you need to understand that electrical regulation situation, because it just means that you cannot offer gully charging to a wide proportion of your terraced house owners.
Do you have supplemental or not?
Just real brief, I guess, to say it's really interesting. Thank you for the answers. You know, just as a councillor representing people, I've been writing for many years actually to say, oh, this area would be a great pilot area because, like Councillor Whitcroft, I've got a massive chunk of terraced housing with demographics of people that are desperate to get into an electric vehicle and reduce the carbon footprint. So I guess all I'd say is urging those further understandings that you're obviously doing and playing a key role in trying to develop this policy nationally, but also to consider those communal shared charging facilities that might be safe and accessible for people to share on terrace streets. I think that'd be really important. Thanks, Chair.
Absolutely, we'll do that, and I appreciate it's a challenging position for you to be in as councillors when you've got constituents and in terrace streets. I mean, I live on one in the city as well, so I know I'm annoying my neighbours sat here saying this, and we would want to enable it if we could, but there's a number of challenges as we articulated.
Moving on to Councillor Batty.
Thank you, Chair. So Heidi Alexander, the Transport Secretary, recently said, we know access to charging is a barrier for people thinking of making the switch. And we are tackling that heads on so that everyone, whether or not they have a driveway, can access the benefits of going electric. That's what the government wants to achieve. And as others have said, they've put 25 million quid on the table to help make it happen. We've just heard we're in a better place than loads of local authorities. I doubt if that gentleman over there and thousands of other residents would agree with that, because we're told that electric regulations mean that we can't have on-street parking because it's a problem and so on and so forth. Let me just give you a brief list of the other local authorities, or just some of them, who actually now have on-street parking, or on-street charging, and are adopting gully charging and all of that. Bedford, Blenheim-Ghent, Bolton, Bromley, Buckinghamshire, Carmarthenshire, Cornwall, Devon, Durham, East Lothian, Enfield, Halton, Hartlepool, Lancashire, London, Manchester, Milton Keynes, Newport, Nottinghamshire, Oxford, Oxfordshire, Renfrewshire, Richmond, Reading, Southampton, Stirling, Stoke-on-Trent, Surrey, Suffolk, West Berkshire. But we're better off than many local authorities here. In all those local authorities, people can apply for on-street parking, on-street charging for, vehicle charging and gully charging, and get it. We hear that there are problems with electrical regulations and whatever. Again, let's look at what other local authorities are doing. Here's a local authority saying, when you plug in an EV charging cable into your home supply and run it across the pavement, you need a protective earth neutral fault protection device. They give all sorts of details on how to ensure that the electrical supply is safe and that the vehicle is charging safely. At the heart of it, other local authorities are looking for solutions, not excuses not to do it. And that's the tragedy here, because it's been going on for years, as I see it. And it's deeply frustrating. And when people say, well, we don't want people to switch to electric cars because we're trying to make sure people use buses and bikes, well, I'd suggest that maybe the better way of getting people to switch to buses and bikes is to have better bus services and new cycle paths. There are all sorts of ways of addressing these challenges. We should focus on the key issue here of inequity. There are 13,000 households in York that don't have off-street parking, and we've heard from councillors representing those wards. We hear from officers that 80% of those terrace street properties open directly on the pavement, and that creates a special problem. Well, you can infer from that 2,600 properties do not have problems because they have a space in front of their property. What are we doing to enable them to get on-street EV charging? We're not. We're just making excuses, as I see it, rather than rising to the challenge and saying we want to be part of this. We don't want to drift behind. We've been part of OZ for a long time. Why aren't we leading the process? If we have problems with electrical installations, why aren't we saying, give us some money, we're going to fix that. We're going to make it possible, because we've got lots of residents who would like to be part of the EV revolution. It just frustrates the hell out of me, I have to say, that we're drifting further and further behind. And instead of being on the front foot, when all of us around this table want to tackle climate change, all of us want to reduce carbon emissions, instead of being on the front foot, developing the solutions, showing the country that we're able to be dynamic players, we're saying, oh, well, let them carry on having their problems. They've not fixed it yet. When they've solved it, we'll get involved. I think it's tragic. And in terms of the broader strategy, I've got a set of questions to circulate that I want to submit to the committee and to circulate around everyone else, that to me are the basic questions that should be asked when you're trying to develop an on-street EV charging strategy. Questions like, how many of York homes lack off-street parking? How does denying a section of residents the opportunity to switch provide a fair and equitable access to EV adoption? What's the assumed carbon saving for York?
You're going to give us those questions.
You know, all of those. I'll pass those and let those go around. To me, if we're serious about a strategy, we have to know what the challenge is, how many homes need things, what the challenge is to bringing EV to a charging point to them, what gully charging obstacles there might be, how they might be resolved. We need answers to those questions rather than just saying, sorry, it's too difficult, we're opting out.
Officers are more than welcome to try and extract a question from that.
So, I mean, just from a high level, so so we're not ignoring the problem. The strategic approach is to bring in more charging locations in local areas so it's easy for people to access a charge point. There aren't, as we've said, there aren't solutions there that enable us to be comfortable to allow gully charging at this moment in time. I would argue that that is us leading in some respects, because we're highlighting these issues to other authorities and working through that. And we wait to see how the learning develops from those areas. So I'm not comfortable in suggesting that we're not doing anything, because the strategic approach is to work through and deliver these sites in local areas so that people have access to charge points. It's just a different way of doing it to some others, and we firmly, well, I firmly believe that some of the other authorities looking at this gully charging are going to be encountering all sorts of issues if they aren't already. And it's one thing that we are far better as a council to observe, learn from, and wait until the technology's there and then adapt our strategy accordingly. I think jumping in now would be a high risk approach that would leave us with infrastructure that isn't appropriate for the public highway.
Thank you very much.
I'll just pull Andrew.
Oh, sorry, go on. No, carry on, Andrew.
Thank you. Sorry. I just wanted to provide a bit of information as well around the funding. So there's the £25 million for Gully, which is available for local authorities that want to take something forward. That sits alongside other government funding pots in this space with OZEV. So the alternative funding is to support public charging, and that runs to several £100 million. And fortunately, we have attracted that funding. So the plans that we'll be presenting fully next year in terms of a dramatic increase in the number of resident-focused standard charge points. That is what's called the Levi Fund, which is an OZEV fund for that specific purpose. We've also been lucky enough to attract funding for one of the next two hyperhub sites from OZEV as well. So the process of attracting that funding is quite rigorous. And what OZEV do is they assess the council's overall approach to charging provision. And it was about a 6 to 8 month process of meeting with specialists for the business model, the technical case and the strategy case. So when they look at providing that funding, there's a kind of assessment done at the OZEV level of is the approach that's being presented, will it meet the scale and the challenge of charging need in the area? Is it deliverable? And is it appropriate? So I think this is one of the interesting things of working in this space is there are different ways of doing things, and they have different challenges and different benefits. But in terms of the work that we've done to date, it has attracted OZEV funding, and it has been sense checked by an external body. So it's not kind of the case that we've kind of made it up on our own. It does have some level of credibility behind it.
Councillor Vassie, a very quick.
Yeah, I'd just like to respond to that because I think Councillor Taylor and I were both involved in a scrutiny topic, trying to get to the bottom of how our public charging points were performing. And after several months, we heard there were about 120 public charging points, and they were used a total of about 120 times a day. In other words, a public charging point used once. I don't know if things have improved. That was 2 years ago. We didn't even know whether the people using them were York residents or people come from elsewhere. So we were spending millions of pounds on posh public charging points and seeing very little for it, because you put in a cheap charging point with a gully, or like I've got outside my house, I use it. I use it whenever I need to. You put in a big posh charging point in a public car park and have them used once a day, I can hardly see that as value for money. So it would be really good to see the statistics as to how they're being used now, so that we can properly understand whether it represents value for money. It certainly didn't seem to at the time. Can we get the statistics for how they're used, please?
Yeah, so currently the network is supporting annually about 40,000 charging sessions with the current infrastructure. So yeah, it's a well-used network.
That's it. Thank you. I'll let you do the maths on that, and you can come back later. Councillor Myers, supplemental.
Yeah, it's just really, I guess, quick to follow on, because I share what Councillor Vassie's saying and some of the frustrations there that he's outlined, and it just prompted me to say that, you know, a bigger report to try to understand some of the questions that Councillor Vassie's asking about the usage of the hyper hubs and other various charging points. You know, the cost is shocking. That's that's the real inequity, the cost of having to take your vehicle to a car park that's got this facility and then being charged 40, 60, however pence per kilowatt it is, compared to just the 7 pence at your own home. And that's obviously a barrier, and I think we've got to be alive to that. I'm sure you are, but it does make it difficult for me trying to represent people to say that status quo should exist, because it shouldn't. And then it brings me to the point about car usage. because in your presentation you talk about not wanting to embed car ownership, but car ownership is already embedded. So that's the reality. And what people are trying to do is reduce their emissions. And you look at where I represent, car ownership is not the majority position. In the terrace streets, it's definitely even lower. So a good half of my ward has got very low, lower than average car ownership. So to support those people that want to switch to electric vehicles, it's probably a no-brainer. And that's probably what Oxford are doing by saying, right, you're making an application on your terrace street. That makes sense because we're only going to, the assessment that we've made as a council is that there's only going to be this many cars owned by residents on your street, so it would be safe. And I think that it's that piece of work that I think would be preventing us from moving forward that I'd like to see happen as an example, if that is ever possible, because an average terrace street in my ward could probably accommodate safely all the people that want an electric vehicle charging point. Thanks, Chair.
I'm happy to pick up the first point on costs. Yeah, so obviously cost is the big difference between a home charging solution and a public solution. What we are looking to do through the public ownership of the network is to provide a public charging cost that's generally less than the commercial costs. So that's the first thing we do. We do also we would like to reduce the cost of the public charging. The way that we set the tariff is that it runs at a zero profit basis. So the network is paid for by users, but it's no more expensive than it needs to be to cover the running costs. What's happened over the past few years is that there have been regulatory changes that have introduced significant additional costs into commercial electricity contracts. So all of our public sites are a commercial electricity contract rather than a domestic one. And to give you an example, so the standing charges at some of our sites have gone up tenfold. And that's purely due to a regulatory change in the background. So one of the things that OZEV are currently consulting on is OZEV are very aware of the fact that public charging has increased dramatically in costs over the past few years. So they've launched a consultation to look at whether those regulatory charges can be amended. If that happens, it would allow us to bring down the cost of public charging because we have complete control over tariff setting and we don't have any profit margin in there. That directly would feed through to lower tariffs. There's also the issue of the VAT disparity. So on a residential connection, VAT is currently 5%. On public charging, it's 20%. And that's another issue that OZEV are very alive to. So there's potential, if there are regulatory changes, for the cost to come down. We're also looking at alternative revenue generation through the network to also support the cost. So we've got an ambition to bring that cost down. I think the final point is part of this is a communications issue. So what something like a gully product gives you access to is the ability to have an EV tariff, which gives you very low cost electricity for set periods of time. What isn't always fully described to potential customers are the costs to get you to that point. So the standard emerging model is that gully products enabled by local authorities would have a license fee that's paid to the local authority annually that covers a number of ongoing costs with having the product. They are commonly a few £100, but the outlier, and it is an outlier, it's not representative of standard costs, but the outlier is £2,900 a year. So when you run through all of the costs to actually get to a home connection, and you add those up, what we find is there's a significant overlap then with the cost of cheaper public charging somewhere like here, where we can hit a lower point than the commercial rate. So part of it is we would be very supportive of getting to a lower tariff on our public network. It is beholden on regulatory change nationally. OZEV are consulting on that, but also I think what isn't always adequately communicated is the full cost of getting to that home connection. So it's almost akin to rental models as opposed to ownership. So effectively the public charging network, all the costs of the network are borne by the network. So you're never renewing, the charge point. You're not responsible for maintenance on it. You're not responsible for safety checks on it. That's carried out at the network level. Whereas obviously in a residential setting, those costs are borne by the householder. So yeah, sorry, went on a little bit longer than I'd planned, but in summary, we would love to bring down the cost of public charging, but also I think there is a wider conversation about what the actual cost of some of the home charge products is overall. And once you go through that process, you find the numbers are a lot closer than they look on face value.
Thank you. Moving on to Councillor Fenton.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the report. Just got a couple of questions. Could you say a bit more about the standard near resident option in the sort of the list of charging facilities? I'm thinking, I know in my ward and many other wards, there's a lot of housing built between the 50s and 70s, primarily as council housing. Some of which is still within council ownership, a lot of which has been sold. So we're not talking about terraces, and I think it's really important we don't overlook areas of housing that are not terraces but do not have a driveway. And is thought being given to how that housing type could be potentially served by standard near resident? It'd be helpful to understand a bit more about what standard near resident means. Second question, just on the back of Councillor Mason's written submission, sort of going into some detail about his personal experience of issues with the functioning of some of the high pub sites, either the equipment's not working or the chargers are being used by CYC vehicles. It's good that we've got an electric fleet. That's a good thing. So reading that made me a bit concerned. Are we confident that the charging infrastructure that we have is robust enough to be able to meet the demand that we all want to see fully utilised?
I think so. Thanks, Councillor. Yeah, so there's the standard near residence is it's a real cornerstone part of the strategy, and using the bits of available land that we're looking at throughout to enable any user to have access to that network. So like it's a flatted development where you haven't got your own parking bay particularly and things like that. There's a whole host of potential different users there, and that's getting more sites with those standard regular charges right across the city is critical for us. So that's the key bit. We haven't got far enough down the line in terms of agreeing site locations yet to be able to put that across, but we are investigating opportunities with colleagues in housing, for instance, where there might be available plots of land, because we don't need loads of space to put some of these in. You're just looking at 3-4 bays in some instance. So that's absolutely critical, and that will likely, in all likelihood, be accompanied with an indicator saying how many standard charge points are accessible within a certain amount of time, and we want to get that number as tight as possible to make it as easy as possible for people to charge. And on Councillor Mason's written submission, we do acknowledge the issues in there. We're working to secure a new partner for the provision of our electricity, so that's all underway at the moment, and we're hopeful that re-tendering process will iron out a lot of those problems. But notwithstanding, getting the existing network working as well as it can do needs to be a core element of this strategy as well, and we need to build that in.
we have Councillor Taylor.
Thanks, Chair. I think I want to just come back to some of the core principles and the language used in the document provided in the papers. I almost found it, like, forgive the phrase, a little bit lazy. So, like, it's rightly raised about the council's ambitions for more sustainable travel methods, walking, wheeling, cycling, buses. But I feel like we need to be clear that choosing different modes of transport is a very different question to choosing a particular type of car. And I feel like there's a sort of incoherent blending of those two things. And then there's a line in there about how we can't achieve a 20% reduction in mileage travelled if everyone in the city owns and runs a car. I mean, that isn't the case now, as has been mentioned, and it never will be the case. And I don't think anyone who wants on-street EV charging is pushing for everyone in the city to own a car. It just feels like it creates an impression that even if some of the difficulties that we've discussed about on-street charging were addressed, this council at the moment has no intention of coming close to this. And that's only because of the language in this. And I'd also say a flaw in the strategy is because of what we're saying we're not going to do. If anyone, despite our strategy, still chooses to buy an electric vehicle in an area where they can't charge it, they are what we are embedding is their extra mileage by having to go and get charged. So that's a little bit at odds with our ambitious target to reduce mileage by 20% overall. Because those people who are trying to do a good thing will end up having to drive more.
They will, but the idea of the strategy is to create plenty of these local charging stations that it's small. So I'll take your point on the wording around not everyone's going to own a car in the city. I think there's a significant chance, if we get the balance wrong here, that you do end up with car-free households currently deciding to get a car and running a vehicle regularly around town. That then has the knock-on impacts on congestion and the like. We know our roads are at breaking point at certain parts of the week. So I absolutely take the point. I should have rephrased that differently. But I do think if we don't, it's a really, really tricky thing to balance. But if we don't get it right, that it's not, firstly, it's most attractive to walk, cycle, use the bus. And then if you do need to use a car, we absolutely want that to be zero emission. If we get that balance wrong, and it's far too easy for everyone to own and cheaply charge a car, we risk having a significant congestion issue there.
So I guess to come back to that,
yeah, of course, yeah.
Talk about the balance. Even if we achieve our mileage target, the pie chart of modes of travel will still be dominated by cars. We're not going to get to a point where it's a minority mode of transport, even though we should try and squeeze it as much as we can. It just sits uneasily with me. It's not really it's more of a point, Chair, and I apologise for that.
That's fine. Councillor Villiers.
Yeah, I think there are things we can do about the language in here and getting the message across more clearly. But I think possibly what's happening here is we're fixating on car ownership and cross-pavement charging, whereas what we need to be, it's about people's opportunity to use all the different modes. And that opportunity doesn't mean that you necessarily have to own an EV. It could be you share one. It could be that you have a car club EV locally to you. It could be that you own one and there's a neighbourhood charge point nearby. So I think it's what the objectives of the strategy, we probably need to draw those out more clearly. And the objective is that we have enough neighbourhood charge points that you do have somewhere nearby, but not necessarily right outside your front door, so that you can charge your EV if you have one. But you also, the objective would be that you have car club EV cars, so that you could, if you're able to, not own a car, but have access to one when you need one. And the objective is that we reduce the need to own a car, reduce that car dependency, and then you have greater public transport options and walking, cycling options. So it's putting the EV strategy in the context of the transport strategy. And it's easy to sort of just fixate on this gully charging thing and owning cars, when actually what we're really trying to do is reduce that car dependency, but still provide those opportunities so that everybody has access to good transport opportunities and a variety of transport opportunities. And it is a really difficult balance to get this.
I mean, thanks for the answer, Councillor Villiers. I mean, I would say we're fixating on the on-street charging issue because residents all over the city are saying that we need to have a much better offer. That's why it's almost like while we're presenting a strategy here for scrutiny, the discussion has been about what the strategy isn't. And that's because residents want us to do better. So I think the fixation or the focus, whatever word we use, is absolutely merited in this forum. I don't disregard the challenges. My ultimate fear is we are waiting for perfect, and perfect does not exist. And this is a 5-year strategy. Then there'll be another one for another 5 years. You could easily fast forward 20 or 30 years, and with York being left behind by other local authorities who have got on, despite whatever challenges exist and may still exist in the future. That's my ultimate worry with this. And the shame about this discussion is that the stuff that we are doing is mostly very good. And that gets lost, and I need to say that. But it's the stuff that we aren't doing, which is again missing in this, like it was the last one. And I just can't see that changing at the minute based on what I'm hearing, which is sad.
Can I just pick up the easy point around, sorry, but I'll take the simple one, around vehicle mileage. So yeah, it's kind of being picked up, but the concept of the approach is that we have enough sites, that the sites that people would pass. So rather than envisaging residents driving to a charging site, it would be a location that they would be passing anyway. So that's why we don't see a significant impact on additional mileage with the proposal.
Okay. Can I just ask a quick supplemental, which I'm not really doing? How much in the round is one of these neighbourhood charging sites going to cost? Because we have a real problem in our ability to scale, which I'm sure the executive member, Councillor Kent, will be able to give you chapter and verse on just other environmental measures across the city or across our state. So how much would one of these cost, and how many cars could it charge at any one time?
So I guess the starting point is that because we've been fortunate enough to attract funding for the proposed sites that we'll be presenting next year. So those sites are fully funded. And part of the assessment process for the Levi funding is ensuring that you've got enough charge points and chargers to meet projected vehicle demand over a set period of time. So what we'll be presenting next year in terms of fleshing out the detail of where those sites are and how many charge points and chargers are at each site, that is aligned to projected demand. So it's suitable for the demand that we envisage, and it's a fully funded piece of work.
I didn't hear a number. So again, just on one of these terrace streets, how much would a local charging point cost us to put in?
So I think the original estimates were that 2 sockets, that have 2 charging bays, is around about £5,000.
Astonished how cheap that is. Councillor Vassie.
Thank you, Chair. So a question, but first of all, a comment on what we've been hearing. So I was shocked to hear scare stories about annual charges of 2,300 quid for having gully charging. I haven't seen that anywhere, and I've looked at many of these operations that are around in local authorities across the country. Most of them, you pay a fee that is between £500 and £1,000 to have the gully, the technology, and to have it installed. And once you've done that, you can claim 350 quid back from a government grant. So the cost, or up to 75% if it's lower than that. So the cost typically is about 400-500 quid, maybe 500-600 quid, and that's it. I've not seen any indication of people being charged rental charges. I'm shocked to hear that being bandied about, because I've just simply not seen it. Secondly, we got the figure of our public charging points having been used for 40,000 charges. I think the figure was over a year, wasn't it?
Yes.
So over a year, we've got 120 charging points, my estimate from last time we looked at it. That would mean 350 charges had taken place on each of those charging points. But bear in mind that that's over 365 days. So what that's telling us is that these expensive public charging points are being used less than once a day for all the millions that have been spent. Have I misunderstood?
So the ratio varies depending on the type of site it is. So there's higher usage at rapid and ultra rapid sites and less usage at the standard sites. And part of the approach is that we have enough capacity in the network, so the network isn't full all the time. So one of the objectives that we look for is to ensure that there's sufficient infrastructure that should a resident want to go and use it, that they've got a good chance of actually being able to charge that. So that's where if the network was absolutely full or over capacity, that would be an issue in terms of you want to have sensible capacity within the network for people to be able to charge.
Okay, but I'm broadly right then that each of these things, I think we spent about 6 or 7 million quid on these charging points, are used on average across the board once a day.
So I say for the standard sites, it's about we're now estimating about £5,000 for 2 sockets. When we installed the current estate, it was a bit less than that. The ultra rapid sites are the more expensive sites, so it depends. There's a big cost range depending on the type of site it is.
Okay, thank you.
I don't have any questions, but again, to put into context, £250 million evenly spread over the local authorities in England would give us £830,000. So a big number very rapidly becomes a small number when you apply it across. Councillor Kent, I believe you wanted to come in.
Thank you, Chair. So 2 questions, if I may. The first is a bit around cost, because affordability is on all of our minds, and the tariff discrepancy is large. But what would be the cost to the local authority of checking an annual maintenance check on, if we're having electric gullies going across the pavement and trip hazards and what have you, there is inevitably going to be some kind of cost to make sure that that's safe, just as there is in paving slabs and all the other issues on highways. So I hear you, Councillor Vassy, that you haven't seen a rental or a licence fee, but I can't see how else that can be covered. And other local authorities I've looked at do ask for that with a gully fee, precisely to enable officers time and capacity to do that. So I don't know, one, if you could give any kind of indication of what that is likely to be on an annual basis on top of the initial install cost. And my second question is around what success looks like for you of this strategy, which is a 5-year strategy, or is it 2 to 5 year? Okay, so in my mind, the electrical situation is likely to be solved by the market or by government at some point in the next 5 years. We need to switch from a percentage from diesel or ICE engines to EV. What is our aim, and if in 2 years, 3 years, we haven't reached it, what do we do? I mean, how do we judge whether we're falling behind and we have suppressed all this demand, which we need and have in York, or whether we're actually meeting it because people's habits change and the charges are working, and these potentially expensive in public charges, which are expensive initially, like at the beginning of any change of system, that because they become increasingly used, that works. I mean, where are we pitching that in terms of numbers, and what success look like?
Well, I don't, without wanting to dodge a question, I think that's the next stage of strategy development for us, to look at what we can deliver, put some targets against it, and then really aim for getting that delivered. Ultimately, I think success looks like delivering the 2 further hyper hubs, bringing in as many of these possible sites as we've identified to make EV charging as accessible as possible for as many communities as we possibly can, and attach a really strong sort of indicator against that as part of the strategy. And hopefully we can, we will work with the new supplier to make the existing network as good as we possibly can. And hopefully, as Andrew says, we'll really sort of try to tighten that gap, bring the cost down to the end user of the existing charge point network. And that will start to put us in a place where we've got a really good spread of different types of infrastructure across the city. We've got a product that works well for everybody and it's competitively priced. So that's where I'd see us being at the end of that 5-year period, realistically. And hopefully, depending on what the sort of those funding rounds are, we'll have been able to unlock some further funding to take things on then. There may be, as you say, if the technology does catch up within that period, we need to adapt and we need to adjust, because I wouldn't have sat and talked you through these electrical regs if it wasn't a genuine issue for us. We would be proactively doing something.
Sorry, this may be the next stage question, the work you're going to do, but are we able to say we have a target of this number of EV owners or EV cars in the city in X years, and if we don't meet that under this, if looking around if other local authorities are pulling much ahead of us and they have a much bigger EV uptake, even within suppressing car miles travelled, I mean, it would be good to know that kind of metric we're looking at, that we're by whatever means on these different approaches, we're either ahead of or at least on a par with other cities in terms of EV uptake.
Yeah, I think we need to have an indicator around proportion of vehicles that are registered in York that are EVs. That's the best way of doing it for me, because you're talking about the proportion rather than the absolute number, which is where we want to be.
Thank you.
No more questions, no more supplementals. Move on to recommendations. Thank you. I've picked up 2, but I feel free for anyone else to pitch in. The language of the report, particularly around, page 13 in the agenda supplement, points 1 and 2, we don't want to embed private car ownership. We absolutely do not want to enable electric vehicle ownership where people need to run a car. I think you really need to look at that language, and I think I saw pretty wide support for that across. I think what it does in the context of not having a gully solution is literally you're trying to force people out of cars. And I don't think that's what this report is trying to say. So that was the first point. Second point is on-street provision. We do need a solution. So perhaps we might want to have like a midpoint review. The market will move on. There's demand there. The market's going to look to satisfy that demand. Has anyone else got any other recommendations? Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Chair. And maybe this has already been done, but I want to sort of have a recommendation around the officer's position on the electrocution risk and how that fits with government promoting grants to support this very thing. I'm not saying you're wrong. I actually quite like the fact that you've come here and you said, I believe this, and for these reasons. I think that's quite refreshingly rare. But I think it'd be good to maybe could we ask the executive member with the officers, obviously, to liaise with government on this risk and maybe challenge them to say, how are you putting these grants out given this concern? I think that's a sort of thing that needs dealing with.
Yeah, we can add that as a recommendation. And also, perhaps if we are going to start writing to ministers, etc., perhaps suggest that this OZ organisation could be almost like a product gateway. So instead of expecting local authorities to, in essence, look at all the legal factors and all the technical factors of an individual product and taking on that cost individually, that they might want to do that on behalf of us. So, we can literally just go down the catalogue. 2 points in one letter to our government minister. Do we have any other recommendations at this point? Councillor Fenton.
Looking at the revised recommendation that was circulated, we're asked to consider whether any further scrutiny activity is required. So I don't know whether, whether members want to consider whether there are aspects of what we've discussed that warrant a small task and finish group. I was really pleased that we had someone came to speak tonight, because it's too rare that we have people coming to speak at scrutiny committees, and we know from discussions among members there is public interest in this. So I think if scrutiny is to engage on matters that are of public interest, we might like to give some thought to a task and finish group, the scope of which we don't need to discuss and decide now, to look at how we can. There's clearly a gap in terms of public demand and interest, and the sort of technological and other solutions that are being put forward, and it's kind of understanding that gap and why it exists and what can be done to close it. So I think if we sort of resolve to come up with something, but not now.
I was going to pick that up in any other business, because I was going to suggest something a bit broader. But anyway, Sylvester.
Yeah, that's questions I put out and be circulated around the table answered. I think any strategy should, first of all, quantify the carbon emissions of the status quo, where we are now. Sorry, yes, any strategy should quantify the carbon emissions of the status quo, where we are now, across the whole city, and identifying the 13,000 and more homes that don't have off-street parking, quantify what their emissions are, what the air pollution we know will be coming from all those vehicles travelling about, quantify the impact on public health, and then quantify the benefit of all those properties switching to an electric car, or some of them switching to an electric car and some of them no longer needing a car, etc., but have a clear scenario that shows us how this strategy will impact on improving equity for all the people in terraced homes, and impact on carbon emissions and air pollution and public health. I think we need to be clear about how that strategy is going to deliver equity of access across the city, because it plainly is not fair at the moment. And any strategy that we create has got to demonstrably improve equity of access to electric vehicles, as the government is wanting to see, or it's not worth the paper it's written on, in my view. So I'd like to see all of those things form part of a strategy going forwards.
We can make the recommendations. I'm sure officers, now they've been given a list of very detailed questions, will hopefully look at them and supply answers back to the committee. I'm guessing that this strategy will go to an executive member decision-making session, or an executive session.
It's probably executive, because it's citywide.
Formal executive. I would hope she would pick up on our behalf a lot of the points that have been made at that point. Just a point.
Sorry, Chair, I appreciate Councillor Massey's passion on this issue, but I think if we're going to sort of start at home with climate, maybe not printing off all the questions at once on individual sheets of paper when they could have easily been emailed to us, and then giving them during the meeting so we don't have time to read them, and perhaps just emailing them anyway might have been a more effective way from a client perspective. I didn't quite kind of struggled to hear what the recommendation would be from what you were just saying there, because it was quite long, and I just want to make sure we're not including anything on recommendations that didn't seem to reflect the views of the committee. Okay, all right, so that won't be on the recommendations. Thank you.
Well, apart from maybe equity of access to e-visa, because I think that's point,
yeah,
which I think we can all agree on.
Yeah, thank you.
Councillor Myers.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Really briefly, it's to follow up on Councillor Fenton. The revised recommendation is about determining further scrutiny activity, and I think absolutely the on-street provision is that further scrutiny that I would certainly want to see and would happily be part of. Because this is a 5-year document that says no on-street provision, and I don't support that. I don't think that's viable. And I'd want to do some work to assess how we properly understand that.
Okay, let's pick that up in further work, because I'd like to put on that and part of everybody else. So I believe we can finish off that item. Thank you to the officers. You've been here for a very long time, and you have been able to answer some quite very detailed and wide-ranging questions. And thank you to the executive members as well. Your contributions were most appreciated.
Cheers. Thanks, everyone. It's a helpful conversation. Thank you.
And which is on page 21. So the next meeting, we have an update on the local transport plan. We'll be seeing Councillor Willius back with us, and the property asset management strategy and property ACV. Thank you very much, Councillor Baxter. And then we have blanks. Are we looking to fill in those blanks today, or would you like us to give no suggestions?
I mean, we can try and fill them in today, or suggestions, but yeah, at the moment we don't have anything penciled in for March and May.
Okay, so the chair and sub-chair will come back. So coming back to the task and finish group idea, which I presume is now is a good time to discuss it. I think not the next election, but the election after, usage of road space is going to become a real issue. Because at some point, the government is going to ban on curb parking. Electric vehicles are significantly bigger and wider than additional vehicles, and it's going to really clamp down on just how many cars you can get in a terrace street or in a street. We've heard from the executive member that there's a move to taking street space for electric chargers, for trees, and for bike hubs, benches. Do we want to expand it out a little bit more than just how do we charge an electric vehicle from your house to your car, to how do we allocate road space in the next 5 years? Councillor Fenton.
I would say no.
I thought you would do.
We already have a local transport strategy implementation plan, which commits to a movement and place plan, which, yeah, but that's something that we should, what I think we can do as a committee is say we'd like pre-decision scrutiny input on the movement and place plan.
Yeah.
Because that's all about use of road space, I think.
Curbside strategy.
Yeah, the curbside strategy is part of that, I think. So what I'm saying is,
I think it's going to get picked up somewhere else.
But I think there will be another opportunity for us to kind of really get to grips with what that means in practice, because we've all heard about movement and place, but not really understanding what it means in practice. So hopefully there'll be an opportunity for us to do that. I think the thing with task and finish, it needs to be laser focused and, you know, something that's manageable. So I think for this, I think we do need to keep it quite narrow, but hopefully there will be an opportunity to talk about all those other things.
So do we want to do that as a task and finish group? I need a volunteer to write the...
Just specifically on
the inability to charge your vehicle from your home crossing the pavement.
Yes, we can both do it.
Yeah. Do I need to write that review tomorrow? Yes, good. I will send an email around asking for volunteers. We're going to have a fairly cross-party and we'll send it to everyone.
And just Chair, for the sake of completeness, not all electric cars are huge and massive. There are plenty that the same size as every other vehicle. So
Quite a lot of petrol cars are rather large. So
I stand corrected.
About that.
On average. And if there's nothing else,
just at the very
any other
bottom
business?
of our potential items for the next meeting, apparently the library needs assessment is coming in Q1 of 2026. So it might be good to review that on the 26th of January. It might be that the executive send it to us anyway, but just to make sure that that's on the agenda if it's ready.
Okay, good point. Any other business? Oh, yes, there was Councillor
And
Bassett.
looking forward, Chair, we've got a new chief executive coming next spring. Councillor Whitcroft and I have both spoken on a number of occasions about the need to really look at council-run businesses and how it is that council engages with trying to earn money as well as everything else. And it is on our list. It would be good to think about when the best time is for us to inform ourselves and get a handle on this, whether it's after the chief executive arrives or whether it's before then, so that when that chief executive arrives, we're in a position to have a coherent conversation and help develop a forward-looking agenda going forward. I think so.
So you'd like to see that what? Maybe slotted into March?
I think earlier rather than later, so that part of scrutiny is for all of us as members to be better informed as much as anything else. And I think it would serve us in good stead.
Got that, Robert? Yep. And if there's no other business, I will call the meeting to a close.